From deep in the heart of Central Texas, it's the Best of the Outdoors podcast, brought to you by Texas Fish and Game Magazine, the voice of the Texas outdoor nation. I'm your humble host, Dustin Warncke, and I'm so excited that you've taken the opportunity to download our show or stream it online, however you're listening. Thank you so much for doing so. Back with our regular intro music and back with our regular content as we follow along with the Saltwater series for part 2 of this series this year. And I've got Daryl Palmer back online again, so I'm really excited about having him join the show. And I'm of course grateful that you've chosen to download or stream this online, however you're listening. I ask that you please subscribe to the show through your favorite podcast app on your mobile device, or subscribe through iTunes on your computer. However you're listening to us, please subscribe and you'll get a new show every 2 weeks. We come out with these every other Thursday I should say, and really try to bring you some great content and some positive inspiration, motivation, outdoor lifestyle stuff, as well as some really cool education and motivation out there for the outdoor stuff that we do. So thank you so much again for watching, reading, and listening, and here is my interview with Mr. Daryl Palmer. Joining me on the phone, Mr. Daryl Palmer. Welcome back to the Best of the Outdoors podcast, sir.
Good morning, Dustin. It's a pleasure to be on with you again. Had a lot of fun the last time, and look forward to some more good information.
Yeah, so this is your third time on the show, and you and I talked a little bit in the pre-chat today just about some of the stuff we wanted to cover, and I'm kind of excited about getting this episode started because there's a lot to talk about in saltwater fishing. I know a lot of our audience is into saltwater coastal fishing, and wanted to mention I've got an article on fishgame.com that I published last week, as this podcast will be coming out the week after this went live, but it's called Marsh Fishing Tactics Scoring in Brackish Water, and it's an article that I wrote with my saltwater knowledge of scoring for specks and reds in brackish conditions, and the hooks that I use, the swim bait hooks that I use, as well as the lures that I use, and the soft plastics that I cast out there. So I wanted to definitely bring people to go check that out at fishgame.com. Just wanted to talk to you some more about, and one of the things that I like to do a lot on this show is talk about conservation, and that's something that you're really big about, and we'll get into that. But just give us a review where we left off at the last podcast in the Saltwater series of where should I start?
Well, you know what? We briefly went over rods and reels, and I want to get more into lines this time, and get into some knots that you should know as fishermen, and
yes,
what knots are productive, and what knots you should kind of stay away from, and just some basic casting techniques, and then how to avoid getting a lot of weed on your line.
Yes,
because that's usually a huge problem here in the spring, is we get the weeds coming in from the Gulf and that. But anyway, I kind of want to go at this as a novice, kind of trying to get some information on, bringing a novice up to speed on some productive techniques in that, and practices to increase your beach catch.
Absolutely. So surf or inshore kayak, that kind of stuff. I think this is great because even if you are a novice, or even if you've done this before, I mean, some of the stuff that we talk about on this show could be beneficial for all of our listeners. So that's the thing I like about doing these shows with you, Daryl.
Yeah, and that's true, because I mean, there's I go out, and I've been fishing since I was 4. I'm not exactly 4 anymore, and
well, I want to ask you your age. Don't worry.
I've been fishing quite a few years in different areas, and we went over that in the last podcast. But suffice to say, I've casted a few times. I've made plenty of mistakes, and I continue to learn. As long as every time I go out, I learn something new.
Right, we all do. We all try to, at least.
For some of this. Yeah, hopefully for some of the seasoned anglers out there, we can share some. I can share some tips and tricks, that will help you increase your catch.
Sure. No, that's good. So go ahead and give us a rundown of the kind of basic gear to consider, and brands and knots and stuff like that.
Well, I mean, to start out, you want to get a let's go with beach fishing, surf fishing. We'll go with that for right now. You want a couple of different rods, setups. If you're going shark fishing, make that 3 different setups. But as far as just getting into surf fishing, there's a lot of fish in the surf. There's some big game fish out there at times, and then there's a lot of smaller fish at most of the time. There's also some dangers in the surf that you need to be aware of. As I try to when I go fishing, I try to practice safety first. Because you want to come back and talk about your catch and not end up at the local clinic. First of all, as far as your shoes, I like to wear Crocs myself. Right. They're awesome beach shoes, just your basic Crocs. You get a lot of I don't know if you're like me, but when you get older, you go out to the sand, and after a day on the sand, your feet just kind of kill you for a couple of days.
I know what you mean. Yeah.
And so the Crocs give you a lot of cushion, but they also protect your feet. And if they get wet, it doesn't matter. They dry out in 10-15 minutes anyway. And they protect your feet from the shell and any other debris that might be on the bottom out there. Pair of shorts, cargo shorts are perfect. Don't keep your bait in your cargo shorts.
Yes.
Because that will attract fish and it could attract predators.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point to put out there.
One thing that I do, and it's kind of funny, I take an old hat. I wear a ball cap usually when I go fishing out in the surf. I got my Maui Jim shades on, which I truly, absolutely endorse. Is Maui Jim. They're incredible optics. If you haven't tried them out, get yourself a pair. They're on the expensive side. They're $100 to $250 a pair. But what's nice about them, and I've had this happen, where if you inadvertently scratch them, then you send it off, I think, with $60 plus shipping, and they'll completely refurbish your shades.
Oh, nice.
And put new lenses and bring them back to factory specs, send them back to you, and it's like getting a new pair of glasses. So it's more of an investment as opposed to just buying a pair of cheap sunglasses.
Right.
And they're also polarized, so that's a huge plus.
Yep. Helps you see into the water. Fishing. Yep. That's good.
Anyway, so don't. I would definitely get lanyards for them. You don't want to lose them. Have a wave hit you in the head, and there goes your $200 shade. So get your pair of lanyards. Eye protection is huge when you're at out in the outdoors at the beach fishing, or if you're even hunting. You want to protect your eyes and as well as everything else. So anyway. Getting back to the ball cap, I'll take take the top of my ball cap and kind of push it in towards my head a little bit, make a little almost a bowl on the top of the ball cap, and I'll put my shrimp up there.
Oh, cool.
That way they're out of the surf, sure. And I won't go far enough out to where a wave knocks me around where they fall off.
Right, and your hat falls off. Right, exactly. Right, that makes sense.
Right. So it keeps it out of the surf. It keeps the scent out of the surf, and you just reach up there and grab another one when you need one.
Right.
But first thing I do is I'll take either a small bait casting spinning rod, something along the lines of a 3,000 or 4,000 Shimano or whatever, and a 6-7 foot medium to light fishing rod, either spinning or casting, and I'll go out in the surf. First thing I do is go out there and start catching bait.
Right.
Take yourself a 5-gallon bucket, throw some and for that, it's not a great big deal. I usually just pick up some single drop rigs at Walmart. It's they serve the purpose. They're cheap, sure. and they're they're disposable. If you lose one, it's no big deal. I'll pick up a handful of 1-ounce weights, pyramid weights, and then the thing is, though, is when you go to buy hooks, you want to buy hooks that are no more. You want long shank hooks. I usually use VMCs or mustads if I can find them. But the VMC hooks are real nice. They're a long shank. Shank's about 2 inches long, but the gap is only about between a 1/4 and a 1/2 inch gap.
Mm-hmm.
You want a real small gap on the hook. And then when you get out there, obviously you take your rod out there in the surf. When you go to bait up, peel your shrimp. Use half a shrimp.
Mm-hmm.
You don't need much bait out there. A lot of times, guys will go out there and put a whole shrimp on one of these real small hooks. It's just a waste, and especially if you don't peel it, because if once you do peel it, the fish gets on it. Hook goes right into the fish. It's a much easier hook set.
Sure.
And you're going to catch a lot more bait fish quicker that way.
And you can serve your bait that way too, right?
Oh yeah.
I mean, I just kind of using the basic mathematical equation here, using a whole shrimp versus a half one. So yeah.
Yeah, you're doubling your
export.
Yeah, I guess you say it. But,
yeah,
anyway.
the bait you're putting into the deal. Yeah,
right.
That's cool.
Right. So I mean, a pound of bait, it comes down to a pound of shrimp will last you pretty much all day. You go out there and you catch your bait fish. You throw them in a bucket. Take your little 5-gallon bucket, throw some seawater in it, bring it back up to the your truck or your campsite or whatever. Leave it in the shade, and try to keep your fish live. Live fish is much better than dead fish as far as surf fishing. The fresher your bait is, the better chance you have of hooking up.
Right.
I would stay away from using frozen bait or fresh dead, as you call it, at a lot of the bait shops, because a lot of times it's been frozen and refrozen. And
it gets all mushy and everything, right?
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
I know that from freshwater fishing quite a bit, so yeah.
But and as far as that goes, a lot of guys, if you're going to use smaller tackle like that, I would probably advise against using braid on the smaller, casting reels and spinning reels, simply because if you do get spooled, that's a lot of braid to have out in the water, and stuff's going to get tangled up in it.
Yep, that's a good point. That's back to the conservation stuff, right?
Typically, exactly. Typically, if you get something, with mono, like I use, the most I use is about 15-pound mono on that on those particular rods, just for bait fishing. If it breaks, so what? You throw another rig on, call it, and you keep fishing. But if you do get spooled, typically the fish will abrade the line down by the rig, and you'll end up getting your line back and not have all that line in the water. Yeah. Braid's a different story. You end up getting spooled with braid. If it snaps off your reel, then that's a 150 yards of braid that's out there in the water that wildlife can get tangled up in.
Yep.
So
that's good to say.
Now, the thing I do use braid for is I use it for what's called backing on my surf reels. Say one of my go-to reels is a Diawa SALTIST50. I love those reels. They're smooth as glass. They're tough. All you need to do is wash them off when you get back home. I usually don't use a sprayer on them, because you don't want to force the salt water into the reel that's already on the reel. So you just want to use just kind of turn the faucet on and just douse the water over the reel. Don't spray it real hard. Spray the rods down, knock the salt off of them. But as far as the reels go, just let the running water go over the reel. So you're not forcing salt into the reel. And about every 2 or 3 times you go out to the beach, you want to tear your reels down and just do a quick tear down. I'm not saying completely, but just enough to where you can check the bearings and check the internal workings of the reel, and make sure there's no sand in there, and make sure that it's it's nice and greased and grease in some places, and then oil in other places. One thing I like to use is the Ardent reel butter.
Who makes that?
Guys, what's that? Ardent.
Ardent. Okay.
Yeah, Ardent. It's called reel butter, and it's a synthetic lubricant that I put on my gears, or not gears, but on my bearings and that, and it just gives me really, really good performance. I don't use it on the gears. I use regular Pen or whatever kind of lube you want to use. It's more of a real grease.
Yes.
but not, you don't use grease on the bearings.
Right.
So
right,
anyway, there's two different kinds of lubricant that you should be familiar with and use in your reels. But yeah, every second or third time, unless it's one time a season, I would say at least 2 or 3 times a season, tear your reels down, open them up, and just check on them, because you don't want to get out there and get into a big fish and find out that that something is hung up in your reel, and you end up losing a big fish because of it. So
when your equipment fails, that's really when the rubber meets the road right there. I mean, that's when you need your equipment the most, and you don't need it to fail, is when you've got a big fish, for sure.
That's for sure. That's for sure. Yeah.
I've been there.
I've definitely learned a lesson on that one.
Yeah. And, take care of your gear. Yeah.
I try to keep my reels maintained, and one thing I do like to use on them is Reel Magic, and just spray them down after you rinse them off. It's just a light coating of lubricant and that, and it protects the reels from any salt residue that may still be on the reel, and it basically repels the salt, and so it just keeps your reels nice and clean, and it's not a real oily, like you get it on your fingers or something like that.
Right.
So, and it will dry. So
no, that's good to know.
Just a good maintenance thing. And after you rinse them off, every time throw some Reel Magic, just a couple spoons on there, and you're good.
That's good to know.
And then store them. Getting back to reels and line, say you get a SALTIST50. I usually use on my surf reels, I'll run 50-pound braid. My favorite braid's Jerry Brown.
Okay.
It's a lot smoother braid than some of the others, and I've never had it fail, so I particularly like it. It's not as abrasive on the eyes and that of your rod. And anyway, I'll put 50-pound Jerry Brown on. I'll use it as a backer on my reels. And the thing is, though, if you're using some of the newer spools have rubber coatings on the bottom of the spool now. Yes. for the new braids.
I've seen that.
Not so new anymore, but your newer reels will have that, so you don't really have to use the mono base before you put the braid on. But if you have just a regular aluminum spool, take and tie your mono. Say on a surf reel, I'll run 50-pound mono on the base, and I'll run just enough to cover the spool, maybe 3 or 4 yards of mono, and then I'll terminate it. Okay. And then I'll tie an Albright knot, but I use a modified Albright knot. If you're familiar with it, you take and you loop the mono, and then you run the braid in through the loop, around the loop 3 or 4 times out, 3 or 4 times back, and then back through the loop that you made with the braid. Now, I've had those pull out. Okay. So what I do is I modified that, so everything's the same, except when you're coming back, you do the 3 or 4 loop, or 3 or 4 turns back toward the loop, and instead of going through one time through your braid, you go through 3 times, and you go around the braid and the mono, and then you cinch it down.
So you got a stronger knot, basically, right? Is that what you're saying?
It is a stronger knot. It
cool.
locks the braid into the mono, the terminating end of the braid into the mono, and therefore it prevents the knot from coming loose. Super. So that's worked for me. So yeah, when you tie your Albright knot from your braid to mono to braid, definitely use the modified Albright. It will work for you. Then once I do that, I'll take and fill. There's no rhyme or reason as far as how much I fill. I just kind of eyeball it. I'll put about 2/3 of the spool with braid, and then terminate the braid. But when you put the braid on, you have to put it on under pressure. So I use when I put it on, I'll have my spool of braid on basically a screwdriver stuck into my bench vise, and then I'll have that sitting on there. But you don't really have to worry about twist with braid like you do with mono. so it doesn't have to go on one way or another. But what I do is that when I'm putting braid on, I will take a leather glove and I will run the braid through the fingers of the glove and kind of make a fist to a point to provide tension for the braid as it goes on the reel. Because if you don't, if you just put the braid on under no tension or very little tension, if you get down to the braid in a fight with a fish, the braid can actually bite into itself and it will hang up.
Right,
and
it'll bind.
You don't want that
to happen.
It'll bind.
Yeah, I get
and
that.
You don't want that happening. Braid will actually cut itself if bound too tightly. Okay. So anyway, so put on your braid. Use a leather glove to provide tension, and I would say 20-30 pounds, if at all possible, of tension on your braid is a good thing. As much as you can put on it. Of course, you don't want to, burn your hand or anything like that. Sure. But that's why I use the leather glove. So anyway, once you get your braid on, it takes a little while. You want to put it on slowly, so you don't put all of it in one spot. You want to go back and forth pretty vigorously. I wouldn't on mono. You can go back and forth pretty slowly using, if you have a reel with a level wind on it, kind of use that as a guide for mono. But as far as braid, you want to go back and forth a little quicker because you want to crisscross the braid to a point where it doesn't bite into itself.
Right, that's smart.
So when you're spooling your reel, go back and forth a little faster and create a crisscross pattern on your spool. And I'm not talking about all the way to one side and all the way to the other side, every couple seconds, but 3 or 4 or 5 seconds side to side is fine. Okay. But anyway, that prevents your braid from biting into itself under tension. So once you get that done, then you terminate the mono or terminate the braid. Then you albright your top shot mono, which in my case is I use a 30-pound, what do you call it? AFW Quattro. It's what they call Grand Slam Quattro. It's a 4-color mono, and it changes color every few inches. That's right. You told me about this before. I remember that. It's really cool mono. Yeah. And so it almost disappears underwater. It breaks up the pattern of the mono. So I found that it works. It's helped me catch more fish, and it's every bit as strong. I used Berkley trilene big game for years, and it's every bit as strong as the trilene, if not stronger. And it doesn't have the memory that say Andy does. I know a lot of guys that don't like Andy, and because of the line memory. Mm-hmm. And what that means is when you pull the line off the reel after it's been sitting on for a week or two or a month or whatever, then it retains the coil pattern of the pattern of the reel, the coil of the reel, right? It retains that memory. So it doesn't have a lot of memory to it. There's some stretch to it, but you'll have that with all monos, right? And then as far as the Grand Slam Quattro, I'll use 30-pound, which I found that works. Your 40-pound is fine too, but it tends not to give as good a cast. 25 ends up breaking more often than not. Mm-hmm. So I found a good medium right there with 30-pound. So that's what I use. And so you go ahead and fill your reel up. You do 2/3 of the way with braid, Albright, modified Albright knot that into your 30-pound mono, right? And go ahead and end up filling your reel up with mono. And once you're done with that, then I'll use about 30-40 feet of 50-pound test, and I just use a clear of 50-pound test, and you want to take and blood knot your 30 into the 50.
Okay, and that's mono to mono, right?
That's mono to mono.
As bad as that sounds, mono to mono. Sounds like we're making a deal, man to man.
But what that does on your top shot, putting a top shot of mono over the braid does a couple of things. Braid's really good offshore if you don't have anything that's going to abrade it.
Right.
In other words, anything that's going to scrape against it. If you're looking at fishing around offshore structure,
right.
Braid is pretty good because it doesn't it won't abrade when scraped against something. But on the other hand, if it's laying on the sand for any length of time, the motion of the sand and the motion of the water moving over the sand will abrade it constantly.
Okay.
And it can wear it away. So braid's
kind of weaken it, I guess, right?
It will weaken it.
Okay.
So braid's not good to lay on the sand.
Okay.
That's why I use the top shot of mono. It's the best of both worlds. I get the capacity. I'll get another 30-40% capacity on a reel using the braid base and the mono top shot. Plus, when you go to change out your mono, which you do every 3 or 4 trips, you want to go ahead and change out your mono just because it does abrade and you might get little nicks in it. And you may not know it till the next time you catch a fish, and then boom, your line breaks.
Yep, that's too late. Yeah,
so
that's a good consideration.
When I used to fish bass tournaments up in northern Illinois, we used to change our line every tournament.
Oh, okay.
We go out and practice and everything, but then the night before the tournament, everybody was changing line because you wanted the best. You don't want any. You want the best possible line on your reel when you get that big fish. So in beach fishing and that, it's not as critical as, there's not a lot of money unless you're fishing a lot of tournaments. It depends on when you want to change it out. I usually change it out, like I said, every 3 or 4 times I go out, I'll change out the top shot. But again, you're only changing out 100 150 yards instead of
your whole reel.
Yards.
Right, exactly.
So you're saving money on mono.
That's smart.
The braid, it doesn't deteriorate at all. It's you can leave it on your reel for several years and it's not going to deteriorate. So that's a good thing.
Oh, that
is basically the same thing as when you're fly fishing. They have the large arbor reels now. You don't have to do that on. You don't have to use as much backing. But on your smaller arbor reels of yesteryear, you would put quite a bit of backing on it, so you didn't have to use the more expensive fly line.
Yes.
You didn't have to change out your entire reel.
Right. No, that makes a lot of sense. And see, for guys like me, Daryl, that like to save money, it's a perfect piece of advice for sure.
Well, I mean, you're always looking to save money here and there, but there's certain places where you need to spend money.
Right.
And that is with your gear and with your rigging and your hooks and that. Don't go cheap.
Yeah, I've said that
every time.
And it's so true in hunting and fishing both, because I always say when it comes to broadheads and crossbows or compound bows, don't go with the big box special on the clearance aisle. That's the time you need to reach into your pocket a little deeper, because that terminal tackle, whether it be in fishing or hunting, I hate to use the word tackle in hunting, but that's the moments that count right there, is how your tackle performs when the job gets done.
That's right. You don't want to get out there and have your 29-cent swivel from Walmart fail on a say a 30-pound bull red.
Bull red, yeah. I was thinking the same thing. Yeah, that's true.
You want to use good equipment, but the thing is, you don't want to spend a lot for that good equipment either. So you shop around and you use what works. And you use what's effective. And that's one reason why I build the way I build, is because my gear is not the most expensive out there. It's not the cheapest, and I don't want to be the cheapest, because you have folks out there that will go the cheap route, but they pay for it in the end.
Yes. it happens to all of us eventually if you go the cheap route. I mean, eventually something's going to fail and they're going to let you down. And that's the thing I've always liked about you and your company, Double D Extreme Tackle, is that you do things like pull trucks with your gear just to show that it's strong, show that it can stretch out a hook.
Getting back to the setup for your rod and reel and line. I've gone through the line part of it. Now, the only thing I didn't go through was, like I said, the shock leader, which is the 50-pound mono, is what's called a shock leader on top of your top shot. And the shock leader does a couple of things. It when you get a big fish on, it provides you with a lot heavier mono between you and the fish. You get a couple of turns of that 50-pound mono on your reel.
Right.
You can put a lot more pressure on that fish to go ahead and get him into the beach.
Right. Or the boat or whatever. Right. Yeah, exactly.
And in some situations, you need that extra. You need to put that extra pressure on the fish because it's for the good of the health of the fish. Because if you stress the fish out too much during a fight, especially hammerhead sharks are one of the worst to do that to. They will actually fight to the death. They'll actually, if you fight a hammerhead until he's got nothing left, when you pull him into the beach, he's going to be dead.
Right. That goes right back to conservation again, which I think is vitally important in our talks about saltwater for sure.
Exactly. You don't want to mess around when you're trying to get a large fish or a large shark in. You want to get them in as quickly as you can. Obviously, not putting too much pressure on your gear, but putting enough pressure on it to where it's more of an expedient process.
Right.
You want to get him in, get him unhooked, tag him if it's a larger shark. A lot of guys tag the sharks, unhook them, have your camera ready, your phone ready. Like I said, once you get them into the beach, it's not the time to go run to the truck and try to go find the camera. That's
you
not
have
the time
all that ready, right?
Exactly,
yeah.
Exactly. You want to have all that prepped and waiting for that particular moment. Get him back in the water as soon as you can, and you do that in a minute and a half, 2 minutes. Shark will be just fine. You get him back out in the water, and he's got a really, really good chance, 80-90% chance of
surviving,
going on
right,
and surviving.
And fighting another day, as you like to say, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Your survival rate goes up tremendously as the minutes that you have them into the beach or whatever go down.
Right. Or the boat or whatever the case may be. And one thing we haven't talked a lot about, which I know is a growing trend with saltwater, is kayak fishing. It's something I've wanted to get more into. I just wish I lived a little bit closer to the coast. But I mean, there are a lot of guys that fish bay systems instead of, wading out there and surf fishing that fish with kayaks. And man, I just wrote an article in the March issue that's coming out. I just saw the proof of it today about, freshwater fishing for carp with a kayak. But, you tie into a bull red and a kayak, you're in for a ride of your life, man.
Oh, definitely. Definitely. They can be real fun, put it that way.
Yeah, for sure. Or a shark or whatever.
Especially a bull red or a shark or something. Bull reds, if they're really green, they'll give you 5-10 minute fight. Sharks, they can go up to hours.
Yeah.
There's a lot of guys out there that catch a lot of sharks in kayaks. But you got to be very careful with those guys, especially the business end of the sharks.
Well, we talked about that on the last show for sure. Yeah.
And they have they wear gloves. They have life jackets. Always wear your life jacket when you're out on a kayak, no matter if it's in the surf or where one false move and say a wave comes up and smacks the kayak into your head, knocks you out. You still have a life jacket on to keep you alive.
That's true. That's a good point to make. It's kind of like when I talk about bow hunting at tree stands. Wear your harness every single time because you do not know the extenuating factors that could lead to your demise. Nobody can predict that. What's going to happen. That's the one reason why we hunt and fish is because we get out and we don't know what the world's going to bring us. On the day we go out, but it could cost you your life if you're not careful, for sure.
That's definitely correct. You want to minimize the chances of yourself getting hurt.
Right.
So the more you can do to prevent that, and not necessarily inconvenience yourself. You know, you want to be able to move around and that type of thing, but the more you can do to minimize loss to yourself or to your equipment, the better. And so that's why you do the safety, this, that, and the other. And especially when you're going out in a kayak, because it's just you against the elements. It's
Right.
you against the water. There's plenty of videos out there where guys get circled by sharks or
Right.
whatever, or other fish in a kayak, and they don't quite know what to do.
Yep.
and know what's going on.
Yep.
And be, having a situational awareness is huge.
Yeah.
Especially if you're out there, a mile or two offshore, because there's nobody out there to help you. Try to go out with a buddy. If not, try to go out with somebody in a boat that's nearby you, because
Right.
you don't want to be out there and be, in a situation where you're on your own and there's no help.
Right. You're stranded.
You get into a situation that's life or death. You may not end up living to tell about it.
Yep.
So lanyards for all your stuff, your rods, reels, tackle. If you're not using something, put it below, in your hatch or whatever on your kayaks. A lot of guys have the GoPros and stuff, and the mounts everywhere on their kayaks, and that's awesome. And you want to document your trips, but you don't want it to be your last documentation.
Right.
So,
Sure. I get that for sure.
But no, I have a line of gear that I built specifically for kayaks, because it's a lot, as opposed to a boat or fishing off the beach. It's a lot closer proximity to yourself and the fish that you're catching, and you have a lot higher probability of a predator hearing the fish that you're catching in the water and coming up and trying to predate on something that you already got on your line.
Right.
And that happens a lot of times.
Oh, for sure it does. And the one thing I was going to mention, and there's so many different kayaks, and a lot of guys have their brand preferences, but one I wanted to bring to the table here is Diablo Paddlesports. That's how I actually got into what I'm doing now for the magazine. Was a Costa's Geobass team got together and did a interview with me in 2015, and that's how I got to meet Ardent, my boss with the magazine in the advertising world. And the cool thing about what they have, because I'm really looking into getting a kayak soon, is they've got kind of a combination of a SUP board and a kayak together. They're thinner, they're flatter, you can stand on them really easily, and they're wider than your traditional kayak. And there's so many advances that have been made in the kayak field, but I wanted to definitely say, if you're in the market for one, Diablo's not a bad one to check out, and they're ones that I know you've talked about too in the past.
Yeah, I've looked into them, and I like the idea of having a more stable platform.
Right.
Because like you and I both are big guys.
Big guys, yeah, sure. Yeah. Right.
And these little 8, 9, 10 foot kayaks, they just don't fit the bill.
Right.
Because we're just, we want to be. We have to have a kayak, not a submarine.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
they're too much fun.
Anyway,
oh my gosh.
When you're choosing your kayak, make sure you put it in the water first.
Right.
Have an in-water demo, to where you see if you like the stability of it. Check the drainage on it. Check the water tightness of it, and the versatility, because everybody wants to pimp out their kayaks. Yep. As far as
all the accessories, right?
All the accessories, exactly. And so you want to keep all that watertight. You want to keep it all accessible, but you also want to keep a degree of safety in there, where your gear doesn't go overboard, because inevitably you'll tump one of these days.
Right.
It happens to everybody, and like I said, you don't want your rods and reels and you're not much worried about the bait, but
your electronics, all that stuff.
Your electronics and all that. Make sure it's all waterproof, and as far as your electrical connections, solder them, and then use the Plasti Dip.
Okay.
On your all your connections.
Yep.
So it's a product called Plasti Dip, and you can just you put it over the connections, and it waterproofs them. So
sure.
Anyway, one thing I wanted to get back to was on the surf fishing. As far as we went through rods. Like I said, surf fishing rods, you want somewhere between an 8 to 12 foot. Some guys use 15 foot for the spinning rods.
Sure.
The more, I'll put it this way: the longer rod that you have, the less leverage you're going to have on the rod. The shorter the rod, the more the leverage. But the longer the rod, the longer the cast you're going to get.
Castability, right?
Exactly. But the other thing is, if you're casting 8 and bait, a 15-foot rod is going to be a lot to wrangle that 8 and bait. You're talking about almost 2 pounds or a pound and a half of weight.
Right.
Out 150 or 100, not say 150, 80 to 100 yards out.
Right. You have to really lob it out there. Yeah.
Right around. I've found the sweet spot to be right around 12 feet.
Okay. That's good to know.
So your 12 foot casting rods, but make sure your casting rods are rated for what you're throwing. A lot of them, like the tsunamis, are rated for more like casting lures, as opposed to casting 8 and bait. And 8 and bait, what I mean is the most you're going to be casting out is about 8 ounces, like a spider weight or whatever, and then bait. That's what I mean when I say 8 and bait.
That's pretty cool. So, I like that saying. That's neat.
But when you go to tie your rig on, I use what's called a modified Berkeley knot, and that's worked for me very, very well. And it's basically you run the tag end of the line through your top swivel. You run it through once, you run it through twice. It creates a loop. You run the tag end around your main line 6 or 8 times. Come back through both loops, and then cinch it down. And that creates a real strong knot at the rig. So especially using 50-pound test. Now, 50-pound, you probably don't want to go around 6 or 8 times. Probably 4 to 5 times.
Okay.
The heavier the line, the less wraps you want to make on the main line with the tag end. So
that's also good to know. That is very good to know.
So anyway, yeah, now you're pretty much set up. You got your SALTIST50, you got your 12. A lot of guys like ARs, the American Rodsmiths. I tend to like the Diawa Beefsticks. They load up real nice.
Right. We talked about that.
Not a real expensive rod, but they have a lot of backbone to them, which is good. A lot of guys use Harringtons and all of that, and but they'll rewrap older rods or blanks, and that's awesome. But they end up they'll usually cut down a 12 foot to about 10 and a half feet, which is fine. So, it depends on your build, and depends on what you like as far as casting. Sure. But like I said, for me, my sweet spot is a 12 foot beef stick with a SALTIST50, and there's nothing better that I've found on the surf than something like that kind of setup. Now, one thing you want to do is when you get done surf fishing, like I said, bring your reels in, take and wash off your reels and rods and that, but taking back your drags off. Don't store your reels. Don't store your reels with the drags all the way up, because you'll end up compressing the drag, and next time you go out, it won't perform. It'll stay compressed, and so you don't want to store your reels with the drags all the way down. Back them off just to where it holds the line, where the line doesn't come off the reel, and you'll be fine with that.
That's good to know too.
So, it's getting about that time.
Yeah, it is. No, we're good, and this has been a great show. I mean, like everyone that we've done so far. And it's kind of the back to basics show, if you will, because we talked a little bit about gear care and avoiding gear failure and things to do to avoid your gear being a failure when the moments count the most. When you're in that fight of a lifetime with a fish of a lifetime. And there's so many different realms we can go into with saltwater fishing. But the thing I love about this podcast is I try to bring guests on the show that try to educate and inspire, anglers to go enjoy the best of the outdoors. So that's always been my goal.
Right. And it's my goal too, is to have as much fun for the angler, but as much conservation as you can for what you're fishing for.
Right, and that's the one thing I wanted to end with is the conservation thing. Chester Moore, who I had on the show last couple of podcasts and the SHOT Show coverage, him and I talk about conservation a lot when we do podcasts, and I know you and I do too, Daryl. But it's about leaving a legacy to the next generation, which you and I have talked about on our first show together. And really, bringing it home to why we do this, why we go out and fish, where you just buy fish in a fishing market, or a fish market, or deer, you can buy venison jerky now at HEB, but it's that lifestyle, that saltwater lifestyle, that hunting lifestyle, that freshwater lifestyle, whatever you're into, that I really try to bring home on the show.
And that's exactly it. You want to bring that to the folks that are out in the field and out on the beach, and that you want to get those folks out and get them back in safe. And right. That's why, we try to stress safety first in that, and to make it a good experience for everyone involved.
Sure. Absolutely. No, that's great. Tell folks where they can find you if they haven't listened to the other shows, and I invite you guys to go back and listen to the other shows that we've done together too.
Yeah, that's well, I was going to say, if folks have any questions about the information that's been presented today, you can contact me at 281-804-9829. That's my cell phone. I'm always willing to talk to you and answer questions. If you have any, you can find me on Facebook at Double D Extreme Tackle. You can also email me at doubledextremetackle@yahoo.com.
That's all one word, right? No spaces for the...
That's right, no spaces.
Cool. I just want to make sure we got that. And your website is one that most people that listen to the show know that I build websites on the side. You're one of my projects that I got started with the website stuff, so I wanted to talk about that real quick.
Yeah, unfortunately, the website was brought down by a company that doesn't do... they're not hosting public-facing websites anymore. And so Dustin and I are having to rebuild... my website from scratch, and you've been a tremendous help, Dustin, as far as getting that back and getting it going again. And I certainly truly appreciate that. If you have any folks out there have any website issues, contact Dustin. He's a absolute guru at this.
Thanks.
And he's been a lifesaver. So my goal is to have the website back up by, say, February 15th. Of this year, and so it should be if all goes well, it should be up and functional by then. And if you have any comments or questions, I will have an email. I'll have the email posted on the website, so just email me or call me or whatever.
Yeah, and Facebook. You're on Facebook. I see quite a bit, and I mean you're very accessible. And the thing I've always liked about you is that you're an open book when it comes to questions about the outdoors and angling and saltwater fishing and those kind of things that people have questions with. You've been a great help to me, just learning some of the stuff that I've learned in these shows we've done together. Really, so.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, anyway. Until next time, I appreciate the podcast, Dustin, and thank you for having me on. And I'm hoping that I was able to help some folks out with some tips and tricks for saltwater fishing.
Oh, that's great. You've been a great guest. Thanks so much again. And there he goes, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Daryl Palmer, Double D Extreme Tackle. You can check him out on Facebook. You can check him out via email. You can email him. I've got all of his information in the show notes. Also have in the show notes all the things that we talked about, the Diawa beef stick, the reels that he talked about, the lines that he talked about as far as mono goes, and braid, and so on and so forth. So you can check all that out in the show notes and see how you can plug in with some of these companies that he uses to work with you on your saltwater fishing stuff. And really excited to have the opportunity to share this show with you, as I am every 2 weeks, and really look forward to having the chance to bring this to you. And want to also invite you to subscribe to our newsletters. There are 3 of them a week. There's Tactical and Practical Tuesday, Wildlife Wednesday, and the Thursday Texas State of the Outdoor Nation newsletter, which is kind of a combination of Tuesday and Wednesday and new content on Thursday. You can subscribe to both of those at fishgame.com. That's fishgame.com. The voice of the Texas Outdoor Nation. You just go to the right-hand side of the page, the right-hand column, scroll down, and you'll see the newsletter sign-up link right there, and then you'll also see our podcast, whatever the newest one is, down there as well. And then you can just go to fishgame.com/podcast for all the podcasts that we have put out there, as well as you can catch us on YouTube. And if you're listening on YouTube, thanks so much for doing so. We're kind of new on there, and I've got my own channel that I put this on, so check out some of my other hunting and fishing videos on there as well while you're there at YouTube. So anyway, thank you so much for watching, reading, and listening. Thank you so much for telling a friend about the show and subscribing, and have an awesome day in the outdoors. We'll see you next time.